So welcome everybody to the second hour of Mindshifters Radio. And today is Monday, July the 1st, 2024. I'm not sure where the first half of the year went, but it's gone. So welcome to July. And our call-in number is 563-999-3581. And press 1, and that puts you in the queue to talk to us. And we would love to hear your comments and questions because that makes this your show. And I'm turning Podbeam on as we speak so our people from across the water can join us. New live show. Okay. So we'll give Michael a moment to dial in. We have some people that are supposed to call. And so if you're already on the switchboard, I apologize. For some reason, it is not recognizing my microphone here. So we may not do Podbean today if it doesn't start. So anyway, my apologies. Trying to multitask, talk, set up the other website. It's just not all working. But anyway. Today's beautiful. It was a little bit cooler today. It's still in the 80s, but compared to what it has been, that is definitely cooler. And so I was actually out in the garden working at 7 o'clock this morning. I was taking advantage of it being really cool this morning and harvested a bunch of stuff. We got cucumbers, zucchini, strawberries, blueberries, lemon balm, catnip, just all kinds of things. So we are thankful for the abundance that we are given. Hope life is treating you well. I hope that if you go to our website, whyagain.org, the gentlemen that are helping to get those special shows, almost all of those are up there, but then another gentleman is started with January of 2011, and he's already through August of 2011. So keeping up with him, but he is really fast. But if you go to the website up at the top, there's the link for our YouTube channel. And if you click on that, what we're doing is we're converting all of our radio shows into MP4s. So all they'll have on them is, like it'll say, Mindshifters Radio Archives from 2011 or something like that, or August 2011 or July 2011. Anyway, we're uploading them to our YouTube channel, so even though it goes up as a video, it, of course, is just the audio part of our radio shows, and that will help expand our YouTube, and we're already qualified to earn money on YouTube, but it says they will notify me when we're eligible, and they haven't notified me yet, and there's nothing on there that lets me click or whatever to turn it on myself. So continue going out there and looking at the videos, click like, follow, and if you are already following, you may be getting a lot of notifications that there's a new show up there on YouTube, and that's because as we're uploading all these archives, it's sending you notifications. So we hope that, some of them are treasures, as they're also doing transcripts and summaries of the shows and sending that to me. So I'm putting that on YouTube as well. And so you can do searches, like if you wanted to find, a channel that talked about responsibility communication or relationships or grief or whatever, you can do a search on the YouTube channel, and it will bring up the videos where we talk about that. Expanding, and we're thrilled that it is, going further and further out, so more and more people hear it. And Michael's with us, so I'm going to say welcome, Michael, and I'm going to attempt to see what's wrong with Podbean, why I can't get on.
Challenges, challenges, challenges. Technology is so awesome when it works. Welcome, everybody. Delighted that you're here, that we get to move to the next level of conversation about this trying to come up with the language for it, how to bring this actuality, which is so enormous in scope that to think we could put it in our minds is pretty much a joke. But we're working on it. And so, delighted that you're here to be part of that conversation. And I believe we've got Dr. Linda Westman calling in today to ask a question or two. She had sent me a text. So, Miss Jeannie, is Linda there, and does she have her hand up?
There are no hands up. I was just getting ready to search my contacts and see what her phone number is so that I can see if she's out there. Linda, if you're there, press 1. Oh, she is with us, 678. Hi, Linda. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Jeannie.
Hey there, young lady. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here because I like to integrate the knowledge I've learned, come together in one wholeness. And I studied with you and appreciate your ability to help me understand what Jesus was really, really teaching. That is so important to me. Yep. And so I was also exposed to the I Am teachings by a lady who worked with the Ballards, people who were working with the White Brotherhood, those beings of light, and the information was so clear, so precise, no fluff. I loved it. It's really about the power of ourselves to create through our thoughts and emotions and to watch what we're thinking about. So I'm trying to integrate that knowledge into the Bible information about the I am statements in John. And my cousin told me about that because they were studying it. So I would like to learn from you about all the I am. I'm going to have to look them up again because I haven't spent the time to study it myself. This is a little premature, but so that's where I am. I'm wanting to know about the I am statements. What did Jesus say? What is the I am from your understanding?
So what I hear you saying is that's where I am? Okay, cool.
No. What do you mean that's where I am?
Oh, I was just reflecting your words back to you and delighted that you're here. Delighted you're asking the question. Can you tell me a little bit about the perspective that you were given that led you to ask the question and led you to make contact with me about it?
Yeah. I want to know, since Moses said, I am, and that the perspective was that is God, and their perspective was that Jesus is God and is it, and I don't see it that way. I just wanted to know what Jesus was talking about in terms of the God within each one of us. That's what I want to know about.
Okay. Well, a few thoughts. We can actually meander around a little bit and see if we can capture. One of the things that I see as a challenge. We know that through the research that was done at Harvard back in the 50s, that in a time frame where when they've got somebody hooked up to electrodes, they can measure 10,000 brain cells firing. The max amount of data that can come into conscious awareness is 9 bits out of 10,000 brain cells firing. And it's been estimated in that same time frame, which is about a 25th of a second, that there are perhaps as much as 20 trillion bits of data potentially available. So truly, if we're looking at 10,000 brain cells firing and we're only aware of 9. We're looking at putting a 20-inch 2x4 into the 8 inches between our ears. It doesn't go. If we're looking at 20 trillion bits of information, we're looking at trying to put an 8-foot 2x4 in the 8 inches between our ears. And that certainly isn't going to fit. If we take a look at what this latest Webb telescope is showing us, that is, I mean, it's saying it is so much bigger. The universe, what they're showing, what they're able to see, is so far beyond the 20 trillion bit world as to be incomprehensible. So ultimately, the question that we're asking, and the question that many people think has been answered, is people think they've figured out a way to put an 8-foot 2x4 between their ears. And my take is it can't be done. In fact, my take is the only way to do it is to be out of your mind. You know, one of the key statements that really is what brings you to knowing is be still. You know, in essence saying, you got to shut your questioning mind up. You got to quiet that thing. And when it's quiet, my offering is you and I are designed to be able to experience it. And then the mind jumps in.
It being what?
What is? I mean, it can't even be named. Actually, if you go back into the Old Testament where Moses, you know, is asking the Creator, you know, what's your name? At least one interpretation out of the original question is that the answer, I am who I am, is kind of like an evasion of the question, because, you know, in essence, we could hear the Creator saying, you want me to put the 8-foot 2x4 that I am inside the between your ears? It's not going to fit. So it was really, you know, it can be looked at as an evasion. And then some of the other understandings of that question that Moses asked, the answer that came back from the Creator is, I am the one who causes existence and can't be defined outside of myself, so try to figure me out. and that's the number one. If you remember in the Codependence to Interdependence Intensive, I offer several what I call the pseudo-solutions of the non-being mind. And the number one pseudo-solution is, if I could just figure this out, if I could get this into my mind, then I could understand it. And you can't get it into your mind. You're never going to figure it out. And so that one becomes kind of a, you know, it's not going to go anywhere. Some of the other ways of interpreting or understanding that statement is that the Creator answers Moses with, I'm the one who's caused existence. And in the ancient Near East, in that culture, there's reference to the Creator's eternal nature and the understanding that we're trying to look at it through this mediocre lens of our transitory lives, and we're trying to put the Creator into an is or a was or a will be, as though the Creator could possibly fit into our conceptual framework. If, you know, as though the Creator could be reduced to something that we can understand in the way we divide up time. And it's ludicrous. You know, the Creator is something we can only get this, my offering would be, we can only get this sketch, this outline, and the sketch is so sketchy And the mind is always trying to reduce it to something it can comprehend. My take, Yeshua at one point is speaking about an aspect of the Creator that in Aramaic was called Ruka de Kudsha. So here's Yeshua trying to explain actually to one of the elders of Israel, and Ruka de Kudsha is considered the third aspect of what has been referred to as the Trinity, a way the mind of man tries to break things up. And in essence, he says to the elder from the synagogue, he says, "You're an elder of Israel and you don't understand this?" And there's no understanding whatsoever. And so Yeshua offers a metaphor, and it is through metaphor that we can at least glean some sort of an understanding. And the metaphor he uses is, the wind. He says, we see the wind and what it does, but for all of our looking and all of our searching, and even today, 2,000 years later, nobody can tell you what the wind is. And so Yeshua is saying, Ruka de Kudsha, the feminine elemental force that comes from the Creator, is like that wind. You're never going to know it directly. You're never going to apprehend it or comprehend it directly. You're never going to capture it with your mind. That's futile. Unless you go into that one command that was given, be still. Get out of your mind, because the Creator can't be apprehended by the mind. But with a metaphor, we can get some sense of, well, the wind creates effects, so we know it's been here. We don't have a clue what it is, but we know it's been here. So maybe if we pay attention to the effects of it, we can get some sort of a taste of how we might interact with it. So to think that our puny little minds can capture in perception the enormity of the Creator is kind of pretty silly when you think about it. And it can be experienced when the mind's out of the way. Ultimately, you got to be out of your mind. I don't know if you've been listening to the show recently, but we've talked a few times about a new one-on-one personal intensive that I'm doing called Quantum Still Point, where I spent 3 days with somebody doing still point breath and energy field work to basically, literally, the ultimate goal of the 3 days is to learn to be out of your mind, to let the mind go, which holds all of the errors in place that we as humans have made, to let it go for a minute and let that essence in, to make the space for it to come in. So there's an interesting place in Acts 9 where Yeshua introduces himself by his name. Paul, is like, "Who is this? Who struck me?" And he's like, "I'm Yeshua of Nazareth." And it's interesting that in the Greek translations it just says, "I'm Yeshua." But in Aramaic, he identifies himself, because there were many people who carried that name back then, Yeshua. And he tells him who he is as a personality. And actually, throughout the whole of the New Testament, as I understand it, and this may not be precise, but it's the best information without sitting down and counting it all out, that 37 different times Yeshua uses this expression, "I am." Now, as you said, the conference came up with, so the conclusion is, Yeshua is the Creator. But, right. And if we go back into that time, into that Aramaic time, 2,000 years ago, everybody had a different set of gods. Everybody had a god. There was a god for this and a god for that, and there was a god for the next thing, and a god, and this group had, this was their head god, and it was like a competition. And so if there's a competition, everybody's got their own god, what would be the best way to come out on top and be the winner? Well, I have the real God. But if you ask yourself the question, if you look in Luke 2:52, what it says is Yeshua increased in wisdom. And you think about that for a minute. If Yeshua is, in fact, the Creator, the omnipresent, omniscient, all-powerful Creator, how can he increase in wisdom? That doesn't make sense. Actually, it speaks about him increasing in wisdom and stature. And then there's another statement that, there are many of them we could point to, but one other one that's kind of one of my favorites. We're told from the cross, and it's interesting because while the Greeks tell us that this was all written in Greek, even in the Greek translations, this particular passage, they say, was left in the original Aramaic. I mean, this says right in the translations from the Greek. This was left in the original Aramaic, though they're out there proclaiming it was originally Greek. Obviously, if it was left in the original Aramaic, say it again.
Do all Bibles say that?
I don't know about all Bibles, but that's the predominant translation, yes.
Okay.
But
I didn't know.
And it leaves it untranslated in the original Aramaic. And the phrase that's given is Eli, Eli, Lama Sabachthani, which has been translated by the Greeks as, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? So let's think about this. So here's someone who people want to proclaim this is the Creator, but he's increased in wisdom, and now he's kind of complaining to the Creator that you've forsaken me. Now, that's a total mistranslation. That isn't even close to what it says, but that's the translation that's generally given. Why hast thou forsaken me? In Aramaic,
yeah.
Go ahead.
I want to hear what Aramaic says.
Yeah. So Eli, Eli, Lama Sabachthani is, first of all, rather than kind of a distant God, like, somewhere off in space, it's more like an intimate greeting, would be more like Papa, Father. And you'll notice in the translations of what's called the Lord's Prayer, and that's a whole other conversation, we maybe get into that if we've got the time, is the Lord's Prayer isn't a prayer. They didn't ask Yeshua to say a prayer for them. They asked him to teach him how to pray. And obviously they were conveying there was not an understanding. And in Aramaic, the word prayer is not about, putting your order into the cosmic gift catalog. It's about how you become the space that embodies the active presence of love or the Creator. But we'll get into that. So here's Yeshua saying, so here's Yeshua saying, Papa, and the Aramaic word for forsaken, or the translation of that, is very similar to the translation of the words set aside. So Yeshua as an individual is kind of, at this stage, not too sure about what's happening, would be the offering. And of course, if they translated this accurately from the Aramaic, it would blow away this whole thing that makes, the one we're proclaiming to be the one and only Creator. But it's said not with dejection, like, oh, you've forsaken me. I mean, how can God be hanging on a cross forsaken by God? It's no sense whatsoever. But what it said in Aramaic with excitement, and it's like, I got it. For this you set me aside. Not I've been forsaken, but for this I was reserved. For this I was kept. I was kept to bring this demonstration to humanity to break the chain of death for them. And so he's like, okay, now I see why I'm going through this. I got it.
Wow. That makes a lot of sense.
Yes. So, how do you get in a world where everybody's got their own competing gods? How do you get somebody to accept yours? Well, you say mine is the actual. And if you declare that,
right
go ahead.
now, I need to leave, and I want to come back again and listen. I recorded this, so I will listen to it again, and I will be back. Thank you.
Well, we've got several more ideas to come forward, but you don't have the space to do that?
She's actually already dropped off.
All right, well then, I'm just going to go ahead with the ideas. I thought we'd have more conversation, but that's all right too. So, in the face of all the evidence to the contrary, how do you get to have the chief God? You get to say mine's the actual one. But there's a whole lot that doesn't make sense about that. And Yeshua, on so many events, in so many cases, attempts to say something that just can't be captured in words. And while there are lots of threats from those who do not understand, and my offering would be those who stand in threat and say, oh, you are contravening the Bible, they're people whose power person threatened them. And my offering would be there could not possibly be threat coming from anyone who's actually attuned to the Creator. All of that stuff comes from all of the threat, all of the fear, all of the hellfire and damnation comes from a mind whose power person lived in threat and fear. And, there are all these stories about how you're going to be sent to a fiery place for eternity. There's actually a really simple, powerful statement right from the mouth of Yeshua. And for me, the idea of understanding this is to bring this into the world, to bring what Yeshua taught into the immanent world where we live, where it functions simply because it's true and what he offered works. So for all those who've been threatened, if you don't do this and you don't keep this law and you don't do this rule and you don't do this way and you don't believe this dogma and you don't believe that dogma, in the name of a man who was really simple and straightforward and said, I come to bring you life and bring you life more abundantly, that was it. He didn't come to bring dogma or doctrine, but there are people out there who want to threat, and again, that threat is simply someone who hasn't resolved their own power person dynamic, where their power person threatened them in order to control them. But there's a really simple statement in Matthew 10:42 that just resolves all of that threat garbage that men made up to try to force others to believe what they believed and maybe to fill their pockets instead of some other god's representative's pockets. But in 10:42 in Matthew he says, and whoever shall give a drink unto one of these little ones a cup of cold water in the name of any disciple, he shall in no wise lose his reward. That to me just takes the thread out of all the crap. We've got 32,000 sects of Christianity, and I've never seen one of them that has understood the power person dynamic and or has given anyone the tools with which to be freed from the power person dynamic. So every one of those 32,000 sects, I would offer, at least every one I've become aware of, has behind it a power person dynamic. And so there tends to be all kinds of threat, all kinds of intimidation, all kinds of fear. Dismantle it all with one statement from Yeshua. Just give a drink to one of these little ones in my name, and you're safe. Your reward is secure. But, there's another particular case that I find kind of interesting that relates to this whole topic, and that is that the disciples come to Yeshua and they say, Master, we saw someone casting out devils in your name, but he didn't follow us. Like he wasn't part of our take, so we stopped him. We forbade him. And Lucia says, forbid him not, for there is no man which shall do a miracle in my name that can lightly speak evil of me. In other words, you guys who are doing your power person trip and trying to control everybody, and you want to own the farm, stop it. And that's what most of so-called Christianity is doing today. Are there wonderful teachers that have wonderful words to say and are really, truly inspiring people to work toward functioning as human beings and doing all kinds of awesome and wonderful service to humanity? Yes. But if at the base of it is a threat and saying, you're not doing it my way, then just offer them this little statement. Forbid him not, for there is no man which shall do a miracle in my name that can lightly speak evil of me. And then he goes on and he offers several different I am statements, particularly in the book of John. And one of the basic principles you need to understand in the Aramaic, and it's expressed in one particular expression from Yeshua, where a man and his son were one and the same. For instance, if, let's say, you and I had a meeting tomorrow and I couldn't make the meeting and I sent Michael J., my son, you wouldn't say, if you were Aramaic, you wouldn't speak in an Aramaic idiom and say, I met with Michael Rice's son. You would say, I met with Michael Rice, because a man and his son were one. So Yeshua says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. We are one. I have attuned to, I have connected to, I have gone into being out of my mind and gone into the quantum still point where I have welcomed the active presence of the Creator's love in me and through me. So now I and the Father are one, and if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Well, that was not only true of a man and his son, but it was true of a man and his teaching. Now remember, he used a metaphor for the third aspect of what was called the Trinity, Ruka Kudsha, or what the Greeks translate as the Holy Spirit, but there's nothing there about a disembodied spirit being. It literally speaks of a feminine elemental force that undoes the effects of our errors and teaches us the truth. Yeshua said, this is what you need to connect with. And elder from the temple didn't understand, so he gave him a metaphor. He gave him a way of understanding something, trying to put something into words that words can't capture, can't represent. But a metaphor, or a parable, in an Aramaic, the word parable means parallel meaning. You take something literal and you lay it down, and then beside it you lay a parallel meaning. The mind thinks it understands, and it takes the literal, but then by engaging in the literal and the parallel meaning being laid beside it, a new understanding comes through. Oh, I got it. I understand from the parable. So with that third aspect of the Trinity, Yeshua is saying, Ruka Kudsha, this feminine elemental force that literally undoes the effects of yours and teaches you the truth, you can't comprehend it. But if you observe, like the wind, though you do not comprehend the wind, and still today, thousands of years later, there has been study, there are people who specialize in weather and all of that. Nobody can tell you what the wind is. They can say, well, it's a result of these forces moving. Yeah, but what is it? Nobody knows what it is. And so the same is true. My offering would be of the Creator. So if you look at Yeshua, what he did was he incarnated as a human being, as love, and compassion, and in all circumstances, he maintains and demonstrates living out of that connected space. Yeshua goes through hunger and thirst and suffering, dies, but he never surrenders the presence of love to that. And because he never surrendered the presence of love to that, they couldn't kill him. They could kill his body, but they could not destroy his awareness and being. And in 3 days, through that feminine elemental force, he rebuilt his structure. So he gives in John several metaphors. I am the bread of life. I am the door. He's saying, here, I've shown you how to eat of the essence of the Creator, to eat of the presence of love. So I've offered you the bread. And he's not talking about himself as an ego-centered being. In fact, at one point he says, if I come in my own name, I am a false prophet. I come in the name of him who sent me, the I am. So he says, my teaching will feed you. If you're starving, if you're in trauma, if you're in turmoil. I had a gentleman yesterday that was in a lot of trauma and pain. And we did a still point session yesterday through Zoom. And he was in a job where he's terrified, traumatized, ready to leave. We did a still point session yesterday, and my simple text from him this morning was where he's like literally been to the point where he's a therapist, and he's been thinking about quitting his job because he's been in so much trauma, he thinks, because of his boss. But as he breathed and moved through it, his text to me this morning was, interestingly, I had a much more open conversation with my boss this morning. Like, oh, I let go of a lot of the trauma that I was taking to my job every day. And it is Yeshua, and Yeshua talks about Ruach HaKodesh, this feminine elemental force, which literally is the breath. In the ancient Aramaic, it doesn't say the Creator sent out his spirit. In Aramaic, it says the Creator sent out its breath. And you'll notice virtually everybody in trauma holds their breath in the middle of their trauma, and that's how they dissociate from their pain. But in dissociating from their pain, they lock it into their physiology and get stuck in it. And so what Yeshua is saying with, let's look at the next statement, the next I am the door. He's saying, I've given you a teaching, I've given you a body of work that shows you how to free yourself. The next one, I am the light of the world. It's interesting, and if you have to play from the fear-based side of the game that threatens people and all, you can't really interpret this one properly, but he says, I am the light of the world. And then, interestingly, in another passage, he only changes one word, and that's the pronoun in the presentation. And he offers the same status to you as he claimed for himself. You are the light of the world. I am the good shepherd. He says, here I am. You're in pain, you're in trauma, you're in turmoil. I have freed myself of my pain, my trauma, and my turmoil. I've done my work. And therefore I function connected to the active presence of love. So I'm here for you. Are you in trauma? Then if you can't hold to the active presence of love in order to process out whatever your trauma is and do your own healing work, guess what? I am the good shepherd. I'm here. I'll hold the space for you. I will walk you through that. And then another way he says, I am the resurrection and the life. Now again, he's not talking about his own ego self. Remember, he says, if I come in my own name, I am a false prophet. I came to represent the I am. And my teaching shows you how to go there. So my teaching, what I've given you, and you'll remember there's a passage where there's a group that comes through and says, didn't we cast out devils in your name, and we did this in your name, and we did that? And he says, why do you proclaim to be with me, but you don't follow my teaching? You don't do what I told you to do. Get away from me. I'm not going to claim you. You're a fraud. So when he says, I am the light, he says, you are the light. He changes that pronoun. I am the resurrection and the life. Here, I've given you the tools with which to resurrect from your mind, which already has you living in the past, and therefore you are dead. You are dead to the truth of of what your created essence is as the presence of love. And I've given you resurrection. I've shown you the way. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Now, many want to proclaim, you see, you got to follow my God. In fact, the disciples, the people who were in fact in alignment with him, they tried to stop him, but he says, because he isn't paying tribute to us. They aren't with us, so therefore we stopped him. And Yeshua says, no, you turkey. This isn't something exclusive for us. I know you're weak and you're stuck in your own ego and you want security, so you're going to keep pretending that I'm something that I'm not. So he goes on, there's another I am, and this was all part of the question that was asked before we arranged this conversation. So thank you for the opening to have this conversation. So he says, I'm the true vine. And in essence, he's saying, here I've given you a teaching. If you connect with this, then you are linked to the trunk of the tree. You are linked to the active presence of the Creator. And you'll notice what he did throughout his life, no matter what they did to him, is he demonstrated love and compassion in every circumstance. He had done his work. And he demonstrated to the world that it could be done. You know, there's an interesting passage where he comes out of the garden at Gethsemane, and Peter, totally misinterpreting, totally not understanding, but wanting to be the king, confronts the high priest servant, who both of them know, Yeshua knows this man is coming to have him mercilessly slaughtered. And Peter steps up. And here's a guy who's going to head up the church like he's going to understand. And Peter, before they went to the Garden of Gethsemane, says, how many swords should we bring? And Yeshua says, just bring one. Now, think about this from the mind of misunderstanding, which is the mind that Peter was in, how excited Peter was when he realized. Now remember, Peter thinks out of his carbon-based memory system, out of perception, he thinks that Yeshua is going to come with the sword and wipe out the whole Roman army, overcome the oppressor, and do battle. That's all he can think about. And that's not what Yeshua came for. So when the high priest servant shows up, what does Peter do? He gets out his sword and he goes for the high priest servant's head. Fortunately, he just gets an ear. Yeshua offers him a message. And this message applies to every form of attack, including the threat that men use of eternal punishment, supposedly in the name of a creator called love. And Peter hacks at the high priest servant. And if only the world could hear this. If only every preacher who'd ever offered a threat to another human being could hear this. If you live by the sword, you will die by the sword. If you live by the threat, it is the energy of punishment and fear that will kill you. your own physiology, your own threat, because you engage in that rather than in the I am. So Yeshua is offering his teaching. He's shown, and again, go back to that passage where he says to them, you're proclaiming that you're about me, but you're not doing what I told you to do. Get away from me, you who work iniquity. Anybody who's in any kind of threat would be in that category of those who, he says, you who are in practice iniquity. Anybody who uses any kind of threat, intimidation, fear, drama, or trauma to get you in line with love is not in alignment with love. They are false. And he very clearly says, and you guys aren't with me. Get out of here. I don't want anything to do with you. And the last section that I had thought of going into, and we'll check first because this has covered a lot of territory, is, and we're down to about 13 or 14 minutes, is I was going to get into a little bit about the Lord's Prayer, or what was called the Lord's Prayer, which isn't a prayer at all. But before I do that, I'll just check, Jeannie, do we have anybody in the phone queue with a hand up? I want to open the opportunity, and if anybody is listening and you're on one of those stations where we can't see you, the direct call-in number to the show is 563-999-3581. If you call that number, you'll be listening to the show directly. And then if you push 1, that'll raise a hand, and Jeannie will see your hand raise in the control panel through the magic of technology, introduce you by your phone number, and we'll be having a conversation. So, Ms. Jeannie, do we have anything happening in the chat room or anybody in the phone queue with a hand up?
It's all quiet on this end.
Okay, well then perfect, because we've got just about enough minutes left to go through this interpretation of what the world calls the Lord's Prayer, pretending that when they said to Yeshua in their ignorance, teach us to pray, they obviously were confused about what prayer was. Because they didn't say, hey, Yeshua, would you say a prayer for us? No. They said, in essence, we don't know how to do it. Tell us how to do it. And it's interesting to note that there's another place where Yeshua talks about, he says, don't be like the pagans that repeat and repeat, that do things from rote memory. And so what basically happens for most people with this particular set of instructions that Yeshua gave? Sunday morning, what's most everybody do? Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, like a drone repeating from memory a set of words, and missing totally that this is an instruction set for accomplishing a goal that's possible. The disciples obviously were confused on the idea of prayer because they asked to be taught how to do it. What does the word prayer mean? Let's start with that. Well, it's kind of a shocker for most people, but in Aramaic, the word prayer means to set a trap for God. Now, the average person says, well, wait a minute, what do you mean set a trap for God? That's ridiculous. Well, if you live in perception, and your perception is based in some form of hostility or fear, or limited understanding of what the energy system of life is about, yeah, that sounds like a silly thing. But when you start to understand the actuality, if we live in realities in the mind, it's kind of like being on the Titanic and rearranging the deck chairs so you get closer to the band and the music sounds better and you're right at the top of the ship, so it's going to be the last. You're going to be the last in the ship to go down, but the ship is still going down. If you live in perception, that's where, and you reorganize perception. It's like, okay, we're rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. We're not interested in rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. We're not interested in rearranging perception. Yes, we are interested in forgiving content that keep people lost in perception, but ultimately we want to take it to a whole other level. And so what does it mean to set a trap for God? Well, when you realize, let's bring Einstein in here. He can be very helpful in understanding this. Einstein says this: on such things as matter, we have been all wrong. What we have heretofore called matter is energy, energy whose vibrations have been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses. There is no matter. We don't live in a physical world. We live in an energetic world. Now, let's use another metaphor to make sense of this. I have a television set here. I have an antenna on the roof. If the antenna is oriented in the correct direction and it is the right shape, then my antenna captures the signal for channel 2, which is what I want to watch, and I get a clear picture and sound for channel 2. Now, if somebody goes up on the roof of my house and bends all the arms in the antenna and turns it backward, I've got a lousy picture and lousy sound. My trap for channel 2 isn't working very well. When you realize that you and I live, move, and have our being in an energy field called love that is so far beyond knowing that trying to understand the wind is easy compared to that, and you realize that your physiology is a device meant to capture or bring into expression or pour into the world, set a trap for and capture this active presence of love in which you live, move, and have your being, what you find in what people call the Lord's Prayer is not a prayer but a set of instructions for how to capture, for how to trap, capture, and reflect into the world this active presence of love, which is what he demonstrated at every turn. So I'd like to offer an interpretation. This is not a translation, because the instruction set that would have been appropriate for people facing the challenges 2,000 years ago are different than the ones today, but they're parallel. So as an interpretation for, not claiming this is translation, but interpretation for today's world, here's what the instruction sets are. Here is how to align, if my TV antenna is aligned properly, if it's the right shape, then I capture that signal. The quantum still point intensive is about aligning the antenna, that's part of it, so that it captures the signal, or it creates a proper energy exchange between ourselves and that in which we live, move, and have our being. If we're misaligned, then we are void. We miss information and energy that we're designed to have. So I'll just invite you to listen from that perspective. And here's the essence of how this set of instructions for how to capture and reflect the active presence of love into the world would look today. So our eternal Creator, and you'll notice the word is our. He doesn't talk about my Father like, it's proprietary. He's saying there is a light, there is a presence, there is a love that we are all sourced from. And that's our Creator. So from the Aramaic, our eternal Creator, parent to us all, who's in the realms of the unmanifest, make a space in us for wholeness that we may be taught to honor, worship, and serve you. And worship there, I would offer, would be appropriately translated as emulate. Teach us how to emulate the exact space that you would to bring forward this presence of love. So teach us how to serve that purpose. Let your counsel, your wisdom, and your love come alive in us. Let your light penetrate us. If we're out of alignment, this is a request. It says, bring this light into my space and attune us to and empower us to conceive of and understand that will which you have already created for us. So each of us has, I would offer, purpose. Underlying that purpose is to develop the ability to live as the active presence of love, and then to bring that into our unique, through our unique capabilities, to bring expression into the world. Tune us to and empower us to conceive of and understand that will which you've already created for us. Teach us so that we may give birth to the fruit of active present love. That you renew and feed us daily with the presence of your love, in the love of each other, and the food we receive is a gift we gratefully accept. Thank you for restoring us to abundance, teaching us gratitude, and how to give as you give and presence love as you are the presence of love for both the just and the unjust. In other words, the day you hear that preacher up there railing in their rage and their threats and their trauma, their own unresolved trauma, at someone that they call unjust, notice that what they're doing is dealing with projection. They're dealing with what they haven't resolved. Because the Creator allows the active presence of love to fall on everyone, whether one would call them just or unjust. That you forgive from us those realities we've engaged in that do us harm and do not belong in our humanness is another gift, another blessing that we appreciate and receive. We commit to responsibility and forgiving as to those painful realities that others trigger in us. When we're tempted or lost in materialism or fall out of harmony with your love, that you're there with us, being the space of love, that your love is always present, no matter how far we fall, no matter where we go, is a blessing we gratefully accept. That with your presence, with your grace, you deliver us from our errors, and through your light, part us from darkness, is another blessing that flows from your presence. We receive each of these gifts with gratitude and praise, sealed in trust, faith, and truth. Amen.